That handful of crumpled dollars was the last of his lifeline, handed over to a man with even less hope. He expected to return to an empty apartment and a quiet hunger. Instead, he found a fleet of 5 black SUVs guarding his entrance, engines humming with a heavy, predatory intent. The Chicago wind whipped through the gaps in the window frame, a persistent, biting guest that Liam Sterling could no longer afford to keep out. He pulled his threadbare sweater tighter against his chest, watching the small puff of vapor escape from Leo's lips. The 9-year-old boy sat on the hardwood floor, surrounded by colored pencils that had grown short and blunt from constant use. The apartment felt hollow since the music stopped. Only months ago, the community art school had been a sanctuary of sound and light. Now, the doors were chained, the instruments were gathered in some cold warehouse, and Liam's hands, once accustomed to the elegant weight of ivory keys, felt clumsy and heavy. He looked at the plastic prescription bottle on the laminate counter. It was nearly empty. The inhaler sat beside it, a small plastic lifeline that cost more than their weekly groceries. Liam had spent his morning looking at the balance in his bank account, watching the digits shrink until they reached a flat, unapologetic zero. His last physical resources were tucked into the pocket of his coat. He took the bottle and the inhaler, sliding them into his bag before calling out to his brother. The walk to the pharmacy was a trial of endurance. The slush of the Chicago streets seeped into Liam's boots, a cold reminder of the thinness of his soles. Inside the store, the air was clinical and dry. The pharmacist moved with a mechanical efficiency, looking through Liam as if he were a ghost in a worn coat, just another shadow in a city that had stopped noticing the struggles of its teachers and artists. Liam handed over the final coins for the refill, feeling the weight of his pocket lighten. When he stepped back out into the gathering dusk, he reached in and felt the texture of the remaining bills. $7. That was the sum of his existence. He stood under the flickering orange glow of a street lamp near the subway entrance. The calculation was simple. $7 bought a modest dinner for 2, or a slightly better dinner for a growing boy with fragile lungs. He thought about the grocery store 2 blocks away, envisioning the bread and the small carton of eggs he could carry home. The movement in the shadows caught his eye. A man sat on a layer of flattened cardboard boxes, huddled against the brick wall of the station. He looked like a pile of discarded rags until his eyes caught the light. Those eyes were blue, deep, and filled with exhaustion that felt familiar to Liam. The stranger was not holding a sign. He was not calling out for attention or rattling a cup. He was simply existing in the freezing air, his body trembling with a rhythm that matched the distant pulse of the city. Liam stopped. He felt the cold bills in his hand, the paper damp from the humidity of the night. He thought about Leo waiting at home, the boy's ribs visible when he struggled for air. He thought about the tomorrow that promised nothing but more silence and more cold. The pressure of the city, its rules of survival, and the institutional indifference that had closed his school all pushed him to keep walking. It was the logical choice. It was the rule of the modern age. Protect your own. Yet, as he looked at the man on the cardboard, Liam saw something other than a beggar. He saw a person whose silence was a scream. The tension in Liam's chest tightened. He looked at the $7, then back at the stranger who seemed to expect nothing from the passing crowd. He approached the man, kneeling on the damp pavement. He ignored the sting of the cold on his joints. He reached out and placed the $7 into the man's calloused hand, his fingers briefly brushing against skin that felt like parchment. "The diner 2 blocks south is still serving soup," Liam said. His voice was steady, though the wind tried to steal the words. "Go and get something hot." The man looked down at the crumpled notes. He did not offer a loud blessing or a rehearsed thank you. Instead, he looked up at Liam with a steady, heavy recognition. For a moment, the noise of the trains and the cars faded. There was only the shared space between 2 people in the dark. Liam stood up and turned toward his apartment, his pockets now completely empty. The walk back felt longer. The wind seemed sharper. When he climbed the stairs and opened the door, Leo looked up from his drawing. The boy didn't ask about dinner immediately. He looked at his brother's face, his own eyes wide and perceptive. Liam went to the kitchen and found a box of crackers, setting them on the table with a forced smile. He told Leo a story about how he had already eaten a large meal at a friend's house on the way back, inventing descriptions of warm rooms and heavy plates. Before the lights were turned off to save electricity, Leo looked out the window at the snow. "That man by the station," the boy said softly. "He looked important. Not like a rich person, but like someone who matters." Liam sat on the edge of the bed, his stomach tight with hunger, but his mind unusually clear. He didn't understand what the boy meant, but he nodded. He had lost his last $7, but for the first time in months, he didn't feel invisible. The sun rose as a pale, bruised smear across the Chicago skyline. Liam woke to the familiar, rhythmic rasp of Leo's chest. It was a sound that kept him pinned to the present, a constant reminder of the fragility of the life they led. He moved quietly to the kitchen, his stomach echoing the emptiness of the cupboards. He looked at the window, seeing only the frost creeping inward from the corners of the glass. The hunger was a dull ache now, a companion he had learned to live with. The silence of the morning was shattered by a low, mechanical growl. It was a sound that did not belong in this neighborhood, in which the cars were usually older and their engines labored with a tired wheeze. This was different. This was the sound of precision and power. Liam pulled the curtain back. 5 black SUVs sat in a perfect line along the curb, their paint polished to a finish that seemed to repel the grime of the street. Men in dark overcoats stepped out, moving with a synchronized grace. They formed a corridor from the lead vehicle to the front door of the apartment building. Liam felt a surge of cold dread. He thought of the unpaid bills, the shuttered school, the bureaucratic machinery that usually only moved to take things away. He stood in front of Leo, who had crawled out of bed, rubbing his eyes and looking toward the window with curiosity. A man emerged from the center vehicle. He was tall, his posture commanding, dressed in a coat of immense quality. His beard was trimmed with surgical precision. As he walked toward the entrance, he looked up. His eyes caught Liam's through the glass. They were those same deep blue eyes from the subway station, but the exhaustion was gone, replaced by a sharp, piercing intelligence. The knock at the door was firm but not aggressive. When Liam opened it, he was met not by a social worker or a debt collector, but by the man from the cardboard. "I am Arthur Silas Sterling," the man said. His voice was no longer a raspy whisper. It was resonant and carried the weight of someone used to being heard. Liam stood frozen, his hand still gripping the door handle. The contrast was too sharp to process. The man standing in the hallway was the founder of Sterling Tech, a name synonymous with the digital infrastructure of the country. Liam remembered the news reports about his sudden disappearance, the rumors of a breakdown or a secret retreat. "I don't understand," Liam managed to say. He looked past Arthur at the men in the hallway, their faces unreadable and still. Arthur stepped into the small living room, his presence making the space feel even smaller. He looked at the meager furniture, the short pencils on the floor, and the way Liam stood protectively in front of his brother. "I spent the last 3 months walking through the places that the city prefers to forget," Arthur explained. "I wanted to see if the humanity I built my foundation upon still existed in the people who have the least to give. I sat in the cold of that station for 6 hours last night. Hundreds of people walked past me. They looked away. They checked their watches. They calculated their own comfort." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out the $7. The bills were still crumpled, still damp from the previous night. "You gave me everything you had," Arthur continued, placing the money on the laminate table. "You didn't ask for a name. You didn't ask for a reason. You saw a person who was cold and hungry, and you made a choice that cost you your own safety." Liam felt a flash of anger instead of relief. "Is this a game?" he asked, his voice low. "Did you enjoy watching us struggle while you played at being poor? Is this some experiment to see how others live?" Arthur did not flinch. "It was a test of character, but not for you. It was a test for me. I needed to find a reason to return to the life I built. I needed to find someone who still understands that the value of a person is found in their choices, not their bank account." He looked at Leo, then back at Liam. "I am not here to give you a reward for a good deed. I am here to offer you a position. My foundation needs someone who has not been blinded by the corporate ladder. I need a director of community projects who knows what it means to actually live in those communities. Liam looked at the SUVs outside, then at his brother's inhaler on the counter. The offer was a lifeline, but it felt like a cage of a different kind. He wondered what the price of this new life would be. I have a brother to care for, Liam said, his voice hardening. I know, Arthur replied. His medical care will be handled by the best specialists. Your apartment, your debts, the school you lost. We can address all of it. But I am asking for your mind and your heart, Liam. I am asking you to help me fix the things I allowed to break. Liam looked at the $7 on the table. The choice he made in the cold had changed the air in the room, making it thick with a future he hadn't dared to imagine. The glass tower of Sterling Tech pierced the Chicago fog like a silver needle. Inside, the air was pressurized and sterile, a sharp contrast to the damp, salt-stained streets Liam had known his entire life. He felt the unfamiliar weight of the charcoal suit against his shoulders. It was a fine wool, soft and suffocating. He moved through the lobby, his boots silent on the polished stone. He felt like a ghost haunting a future he did not deserve. His brother sat in a bright, sunlit clinic 5 miles away. For the first time, Leo was not a number on a waiting list. He was a patient with a name and a dedicated nurse. That security was a physical presence in Liam's mind, a warmth that settled in his gut. It was the sound of a steady heartbeat. Liam reached the 34th floor. The doors opened to an expanse of open space and minimalist furniture. Julian was waiting for him. The man stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city with the detached gaze of a god watching an anthill. He was young, his hair groomed to a sharp edge, and his smile possessed a practiced, hollow quality. "The artist arrives," Julian said. He did not offer a hand. He gestured toward a sleek, white table holding a single glass tablet. "Arthur has a lot of faith in your background. He believes you possess a perspective we lack. I, however, believe in data. Data is honest. Data does not have moods." Liam stood across from him. He felt the hum of the building beneath his feet, a low-frequency vibration of immense power. "I am here to work, Julian, not to be a perspective." Julian tapped the glass tablet. Images of neighborhoods flickered across the surface. "We are streamlining the social impact portfolio." Arthur was too distracted by sentimentality. He let things grow messy. "My job is to bring order, to ensure the resources are utilized with maximum efficiency." He swiped the screen until a familiar address appeared. It was the St. Jude Community Music Room. Liam's heart stuttered. It was a small basement space 3 blocks from his old apartment. He had spent a decade there, teaching children how to find their voices through rhythm. "This facility is a leak in the boat," Julian stated. "Low attendance, high maintenance costs, and zero measurable return on investment. The proposal is to terminate the lease by the end of the business day. We will reallocate those funds to a new digital literacy center in the downtown district. It will look better in the annual report." Liam looked at the screen. He saw the faces of the students in his mind. He saw the scarred wooden tables and the piano with the sticky middle C. "Attendance is low because the heating broke in November," Liam said. "The families that don't have cars, they can't get to a downtown center. If you close this, those kids have no place to go." Julian leaned forward, his voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous whisper. "You are missing the point. This is your first official act. Arthur is watching. The board is watching. Sign the termination order. Prove that you can prioritize the health of the company over a handful of broken instruments. If you want to keep the doctors for your brother, you need to show us you belong in this room." The threat was unspoken but heavy. Liam looked down at the tablet. The authorize button was a small, glowing green square. It represented a life of ease. It represented Leo's medicine, a warm home, and the end of the hunger. All he had to do was erase a small part of the neighborhood that had raised him. He looked out the window. Down on the sidewalk, a small group of people stood near the fountain. He recognized Mrs. Gable, the woman who had run the music room for 40 years. She was holding a stack of papers, her coat thin against the wind. She was waiting for a meeting that Julian had no intention of attending. The silence in the office stretched. Liam thought of the $7 he had given away. That choice had been easy because he had nothing to lose. This choice was different. This choice required him to walk back into the cold by his own volition. "The instruments aren't broken," Liam said. He pulled his hands away from the table. "The people using them are just tired. I will not authorize the closure." Julian's eyes hardened. The mask of polite indifference fell away. "You just threw away the best thing that ever happened to you for a basement and a few kids who will forget you in a week. Do you think Arthur will protect you when the board sees you as a liability?" "I'm not doing it for Arthur," Liam replied. He turned toward the elevator. The wool of the suit felt like lead. He knew the phone call to the clinic would be his next task. He knew the SUVs would not be waiting for him tomorrow. He walked out of the office, leaving the tablet and the security it offered behind. He had chosen the music, even if he had to play it in the dark. The silence in the boardroom possessed a physical weight. Liam sat at the long table of dark wood, feeling the cold air from the vents brush against his neck. The walls of glass offered a panoramic view of Chicago. From this height, the struggles of the city were reduced to tiny, flickering points of light. It was easy to forget the bite of the wind when the floor beneath your feet was heated. Liam looked at the medical documents for Leo resting inside his leather folder. The specialized treatments were scheduled for the following week. If he lost this position, the door to that clinic would swing shut. The boy was sleeping soundly back at the apartment, his breathing easier than it had been in years, thanks to the high-end equipment. Liam felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He was not only gambling with his own future, but with the air in his brother's lungs. Julian sat across from him, his hands folded neatly on the table. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed, the way a scientist might look at a failed experiment. He began to speak, his voice a smooth, practiced drone. He spoke of metrics. He spoke of fiscal responsibility and the necessity of a unified vision. He framed Liam's refusal to close the music room as a failure of professional discipline. He used a laser pointer to highlight charts on the wall, showing the inefficiency of the small basement space. He spoke of the standards of excellence and the rules that governed the foundation. Liam felt the eyes of the 12 board members. They looked at his suit, which was a gift from Arthur, and then at his hands. His fingers still bore the faint calluses of a musician. He felt the weight of their judgment. To these people, he was a charity project who had forgotten his place. They saw his empathy as a lack of sophistication. One of the senior board members, a woman with silver hair and a voice like dry gravel, leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling, you were given a directive. Why did you prioritize a non-performing asset over the strategic goals of the foundation?" Liam stood up. He did not look at the charts. He looked directly at Arthur, who sat at the head of the table. "The music room is not an asset," he said. "It is a promise. We tell these neighborhoods that we are here to help, but we only stay as long as the math is easy. When the heating breaks or the attendance drops, because families are working 3 jobs to survive, we leave. If the foundation only exists to follow rules that ignore the people they are meant to serve, then the foundation is the thing that is broken." Julian scoffed, a small, sharp sound in the quiet room. "Sentiment is expensive, Liam. We are a corporation, not a social club." Then Arthur spoke. His voice was quiet, but the room went silent instantly. "I founded this company on the idea that technology should bridge the gap between those with power and those without. Julian, you mentioned that the music room was a leak in the boat." Julian nodded, sensing support from the older man. "A significant one, sir. It drains resources that could be used for the new downtown initiative." Arthur turned a page in a folder that Julian had not seen. "I spent some time in that neighborhood recently. I saw the music room. I also saw that the funds allocated for the heating repairs 2 years ago were diverted. They were used to supplement the marketing budget for your downtown project, the one that looks so good in the annual report." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Julian's face paled, the blood draining from his cheeks until he looked as sterile as the furniture. The system's moral failure was being exposed. The rules had been followed on paper, but the intent had been hollowed out. "The rules were followed on paper," Arthur continued, "but the character of the project was betrayed. Liam did not fail a test of discipline. He passed a test of integrity. He saw what I had become too busy to notice." Arthur looked at Liam with a strange, tired pride. But integrity has a price in a room like this. Julian is correct that we need order. The board will now vote on whether your refusal constitutes a breach of contract. The tension reached its peak. Liam realized that even with Arthur's support, the system itself was designed to protect the status quo. He was being judged by people who saw human connection as a flaw in the code. He thought of Leo and felt a wave of nausea. He was standing his ground, but the ground was unstable. The vote was split. The board remained undecided, the silence stretching until it felt like a wall. Liam was not fired, but he was not embraced. He was relegated to a position of observation, his authority stripped until a final decision could be made. He walked out of the room, feeling more alone than he had at the subway station. The distance between him and this professional sphere had become a canyon. He had kept his job, but he had lost his peace. The desk in Liam's new office was a slab of polished obsidian that seemed to swallow the light. He sat in the silence of the late afternoon, his hands resting on the cool surface. He had been given a title, but his calendar was a desert of empty white squares. No one called him for meetings. The assistants looked at the floor when he passed the coffee station. He was a ghost in a high-end suit, a man preserved in the amber of corporate indecision. Julian appeared in the doorway. He did not ask to enter. He simply occupied the space, his shadow stretching across the floor. He held a thin tablet, the glow of the screen casting a pale blue light on his sharp features. "The internal audit is a thorough process," Julian said. His voice was casual, almost friendly. "They are looking into the financial records of the St. Jude Music Room. It seems there were some irregularities in the way the small grants were handled during your time as a teacher. Nothing major, perhaps. Just a few $1,000s that don't quite align with the receipts." Liam felt a cold spike of adrenaline. "I wasn't in charge of the books, Julian. I taught the children. I fixed the instruments." "Perception is a difficult thing to manage," Julian replied, his thumbs sliding across the glass. "In this environment, a lack of documentation looks like intent. People are already whispering that your sudden appointment was a way to bury those old mistakes. They say you found a powerful friend to help you hide." Liam stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh, discordant sound. The accusation was a fabrication, a surgical strike designed to isolate him. He saw the logic of the move. In a place built on reputation, the mere hint of dishonesty was a terminal illness. He left the building an hour later, skipping the company car. He needed the grit of the city under his feet. He walked until the glass towers gave way to brick and rusted fire escapes. He ended up at a small diner near his old apartment, a place with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of burnt coffee. Marcus was sitting at the counter. He was Liam's oldest friend, the man who had shared a cramped stage with him for 5 years when they played in a jazz trio. Marcus looked at Liam's suit, his eyes moving over the fine fabric with a mixture of confusion and resentment. "I heard about the new life," Marcus said, not turning his head. "The SUVs, the big office, the foundation." "It's not what you think," Liam said, sitting on the stool beside him. Marcus finally looked at him. His face was tired, his skin gray from the winter chill. "Isn't it? You left the school when things got hard. Now you're working for the people who cut our funding. I saw the news, Liam. You're the face of their new humanity campaign. They're using you to make the board look good while they close the spaces we built." "I am trying to save those spaces from the inside," Liam argued, his voice low. "You're wearing $1,000 of wool while my students are practicing in a basement with no heat." Marcus snapped. "You didn't save us. You saved yourself. You sold the music for a steady paycheck and a title that doesn't mean anything." Marcus stood up and placed a few coins on the counter. He didn't look back as he walked out into the biting wind. Liam stayed on the stool, the weight of the silence in the diner heavier than the silence of the office. He felt the rupture in his life, a jagged line that separated the man he was from the man he was pretending to be. He returned home to find Leo sitting on the floor, the boys breathing loud in the quiet room. The expensive medical machine hummed in the corner, a silver box that represented both safety and betrayal. Liam sat on the floor beside his brother and picked up a blunt pencil. He tried to draw, but his fingers felt stiff. He looked at the machine, then at his own hands. He was keeping his brother alive with the resources of the people who were destroying his soul. The integrity he had tried to protect felt like a glass ornament, beautiful but shattered into 1,000 tiny, sharp pieces. The fluorescent lights of the corridor hummed with a sterile energy. Liam stood near the entrance of the conference hall, his hand resting on the cold brass of the door handle. Inside, Julian was presenting the quarterly results to a group of potential investors. His voice was a rhythmic tide of jargon and optimism. He talked about the bridge between profit and purpose. He showed a slide of Liam's face, a photograph taken during his first week, portraying him as the soul of the new sterling tech. Liam's phone vibrated against his thigh. The screen showed the name of the private clinic. He stepped into a quiet alcove, his heart hammering against his ribs. "He is struggling," the nurse said. Her voice was calm, but the underlying urgency was unmistakable. "The new medication is not taking hold as we expected. His oxygen levels are dipping. He is asking for you." Liam looked at the heavy doors of the conference hall. This meeting was the final hurdle before the board decided his permanent status. Julian had spent the morning reminding him that his presence was a requirement, a visual proof of the heart of the company. If he walked away now, he would be handing Julian the weapon he needed to finish the job of removing him. He did not hesitate. He walked toward the elevators, the fine wool of his jacket feeling like a heavy skin he wanted to shed. The clinic was a place of muted tones and soft carpets. Liam found Leo in a room filled with the rhythmic hiss and click of the breathing machine. The boy looked small in the center of the white bed, his skin the color of old paper. He reached out a hand when he saw Liam, his fingers trembling. Liam took the hand, feeling the heat of the fever. He sat on the edge of the bed, his back to the door, and began to hum a low, steady melody. It was a song from the old apartment, a piece of the life they had left behind. The crisis passed slowly. The machine settled into a calmer pace. Leo fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Liam remained in the chair, his eyes fixed on the small movement of the chest of his brother. The door opened. Julian stood there, his coat perfectly buttoned, his face wearing a mask of polite concern. He did not enter the room. He stayed in the threshold, a visitor from a different reality. "The investors were disappointed," Julian said. He checked his watch, a gold circle that caught the light. "Arthur tried to make excuses for you, but the damage is done. In this business, reliability is the only currency that matters. You chose a personal emergency over a structural turning point for the foundation." Liam did not look up. He watched the way the light from the hallway spilled across the floor, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. "I chose my brother," Liam said, "and in doing so, you confirmed what everyone suspected," Julian replied. "You are a man of small moments. You lack the stamina for the larger picture. You are a liability to the legacy of Arthur." Julian turned to leave, but he stopped for a second to adjust a stack of papers on the small table by the door. In his haste and his sense of victory, his movement was careless. A thin folder slid from the stack, landing silently on the carpet. Julian did not notice. He walked away, his footsteps fading into the distance. Liam waited until the sound was gone. He stood up and retrieved the folder. It was a set of internal logistics reports, the kind of documents that usually stayed behind double-encrypted firewalls. He sat back down in the dim light of the medical monitors. He began to read. He noticed a pattern in the numbers, a series of diversions that led away from the community accounts and toward a private holding company. He saw signatures that were familiar and dates that coincided with the closing of the music school. He remained silent. He watched the way Julian moved through the building in the days that followed, seeing the subtle shifts in the posture of the man. He saw the arrogance in the way Julian dismissed the staff. He saw the pride that preceded the fall. Julian had underestimated the musician. He had assumed that because Liam was quiet, he was not listening. He had assumed that because Liam was empathetic, he was weak. Liam closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. The machine in the corner continued its steady hum. The hunt had begun, but the roles had changed. The assembly of shareholders was a sea of gray suits and hushed voices. Liam watched the snow hit the glass of the executive floor, the flakes disappearing against the heat of the window. He felt the folder against his side, a hidden weight that anchored him to the floor. Across the room, Julian was talking to a group of influential investors. He looked relaxed, his movements expansive and confident. He believed the battle was over. He believed Liam was a ghost waiting for the wind to carry him away. Julian took the stage. The lights dimmed, and a massive screen displayed the projected growth of the Sterling Foundation. The voice of the man was a practiced instrument. He spoke of progress and modernization. Then the tone shifted. He began to talk about the need for absolute transparency and the unfortunate necessity of vetting those who represent the brand. He displayed a slide. It was a photograph of the eviction notice that had been pinned to the door of Liam months ago. Then came a medical bill for Leo. Then a shot of Liam standing by the subway station, his coat torn and his face shadowed by the winter. "We must ask ourselves," Julian said, his eyes scanning the crowd, "if a man who cannot manage his own life is fit to manage the hopes of thousands. We must ask if we are a business or a shelter for the desperate. Compassion is a virtue, but incompetence is a liability." The silence that followed was brutal. It was a vacuum that sucked the oxygen from the room. Liam felt the heat of 100 gazes. He saw the way the board members shifted in their seats, their faces hardening into masks of polite disgust. They saw the poverty, the struggle, and the desperation. They saw a man who had failed the basic requirements of the city. Liam stood up. He did not rush. He walked to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing on the hard floor. He did not look at Julian. He looked at Arthur. The older man sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly on the table. Liam reached the podium. He did not use the microphone to defend his past. Instead, he opened the folder and placed the first page under the document camera. The screen changed. The images of the eviction notice were replaced by a spreadsheet. It showed a series of wire transfers. The names on the accounts were coded, but the destination was a holding company registered in a distant territory. "I am a musician," Liam said, his voice quiet but steady. "I spent years learning to hear the rhythm in things. When the music room closed, the reason given was a lack of funds. But the rhythm of these numbers is wrong. The money did not disappear. It moved." He turned the page. The next document showed the signature on the authorization forms. It was the signature of Julian. "I watched you," Liam continued, looking at Julian now. "I watched the way you looked at the reports. You thought I was too broken by my own life to see yours. You thought my past made me blind. But when a person has nothing, that person learns to look at the shadows." Julian moved to speak, his mouth opening and closing. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, naked panic. He looked at the board, then at Arthur, searching for a lifeline. Arthur stood up. He moved slowly, his age showing in the set of his shoulders. He walked to the screen and stared at the numbers. He looked at the dates. He saw the moment he had signed off on the restructuring plan without checking the details. "I ignored the warnings," Arthur said. He did not speak to the investors. He spoke to the room. "I wanted to believe in the order Julian promised. I chose the comfort of a lie over the difficulty of the truth. I failed as a leader. I failed the people who trusted this name." The room remained silent. The power had shifted. The system had exposed its own rot, and the man they had subestimato was the one holding the mirror. Julian walked off the stage, his head low, while the board members began to murmur in a different tone. Liam stayed at the podium for a moment, looking at the numbers on the screen. He had kept his integrity, but he knew the victory would not bring back the years of silence. The snow fell in thick, silent clumps, piling against the window pane of the small house on the north side of the city. Inside, the radiator hissed a steady, comforting rhythm. It was a sound of safety that Liam Sterling still found himself pausing to appreciate. He sat on the sofa, watching the steam rise from his mug. He felt the weight of the last year in his bones, a slow ache that had replaced the sharp, frantic stabs of survival. Leo sat on the rug. He was taller now, his face filled out with the health that regular meals and specialized care provided. The breathing machine was gone, replaced by a small, portable inhaler that he rarely needed. The boy was focused on a sketchbook, his fingers moving with a grace that Liam admired. He wasn't drawing the city anymore. He was drawing trees, thick and green, the kind they saw when they drove out to the park. The boy looked up, his eyes bright and clear, lacking the shadow of the fear that once lived there. A small, upright piano stood in the corner of the room. It was not a concert grand. It was a simple instrument with a few scratches on the mahogany finish. Liam had found it in a closing shop in the old neighborhood. He played it every evening, the notes filling the space with a quiet, honest resonance. He had lost the grand stages and the high-profile galas of the corporate world. After the assembly, he had requested a smaller office and a lower profile. He didn't want the spotlight. He wanted the work. The Sterling Tech Foundation now operated without the fanfare. There were no SUVs blocking the streets. There were no cameras documenting the acts of charity for the sake of the board of directors. Liam spent his days in the basements and the community centers, listening to the people the system usually ignored. He made sure the heating was fixed in the schools. He made sure the instruments were tuned in the local halls. He did it without seeking a public thank you, remembering the blue eyes of a man on a piece of cardboard. Arthur visited sometimes. He had aged, the scandal with Julian having stripped away his remaining illusions. They would sit in the small kitchen, two men who had found a strange, quiet respect in the aftermath of the storm. Julian was gone, his name a footnote in the legal records of the company. The power he had craved had proved to be a brittle thing, easily shattered by a few pages of truth. Arthur often looked at the piano, though he never asked Liam to play. He seemed content just to be in a room where the air was honest. Liam looked at the small frame on the mantel. Inside, under a layer of glass, were the $7. The bills were still wrinkled, the ink faded in the corners. They were a reminder of the night the air changed. That money had bought a future, but the cost had been high. Liam thought of Marcus. He had tried to reach out multiple times to explain the changes in the foundation and the work they were doing, but the silence from his old friend remained absolute. Some bridges were burnt too thoroughly to be rebuilt. The music of their trio was a memory, a beautiful thing lost to the necessities of a different life. Liam accepted this loss as part of the price of his integrity. He stood up and walked to the window. The street was quiet. A single street lamp cast a yellow glow on the sidewalk. He saw a person walking alone, their head bowed against the wind. He didn't see a stranger. He saw a story. He saw the potential for a choice that could change the direction of a life. The recognition he received now didn't come from a boardroom or a press release. It came from the way the children at the music center looked at him when he arrived, or the way the neighbors nodded to him on the stairs. Leo looked up from his drawing, sensing the shift in the room. "You're thinking about the station," the boy said. Liam smiled and sat back down, leaning his head against the back of the sofa. "I'm thinking about how quiet it is," he said. The boy nodded, returning to his sketch. "It's a good quiet." Liam felt the truth of those words. He had lost his innocence and some of his oldest connections, but he had gained a clarity that could not be purchased with any amount of wealth. He was no longer a ghost in the city. He was a man who knew the value of a single hand reached out in the dark. The $7 were gone, but the humanity they represented had become the foundation of his life. The house was warm. The boy was breathing easily. The snow continued to fall, covering the city in a soft, white blanket that leveled the ground, making the rich and the poor look the same for a little while. The music could wait until morning.